there. So, if we all could please be quiet, and let's hear from our first candidate for seat B, and that will be Troy Belliston. Opening statement, 1.5 minutes.
Opening statement. Well, I got my exercise back in the room pacing, so I think I'm pretty worked out. But thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. Most of you I know, but those of you I don't, lived here most of my life. We moved here when I was 7 years old. My dad grew up here, married my mom up north, and then brought the family back down. My grandpa brought him here before that. So we have a lot of ties and investment in this community. But I grew up and went to Pineview. After that, I went in the military, spent 5 years overseas, deployed twice, another 3 years back stateside. When I got out of the military, Dad needed a little bit of help in small commercial development. So I got working with him, and the idea was, I'd ride around with him, learn the ropes, and then, pretty soon he'd create an opportunity for me to where I could go out on my own. We rode around together for about 3 days, and he had me a roll of plans about that big around and said, have fun, I'm going golfing. So there was a little bit of on-the-job training, and he got me going into it pretty quick. But being in small commercial development, you have a hand in planning and infrastructure and growth and everything all at once. And so I ran for city council in 2015 and was elected. And what I really like about serving on the city council is it's development at a grander scale, and you're just serving your community and doing what you can to help your community grow in a healthy and responsible manner. And anyway, thank you all. Appreciate it.
Victor.
Well, it is good to see all of you, and Sean and Vince, thank you for putting this on the chamber, and thank all of you as citizens for coming out and participating in this. For those of you I don't know, my name is Victor Iverson. I was born and raised in Washington County. I've been on on the county commission since 2014. I live in La Verkin. I grew up on a farm, and my family owns a ranch out in the West Desert. Married my wife, Audrey, who's from Hurricane. That's allowed, right across the bridge. We've been married for 33 years, and I have 5 children and 5 grandchildren. And I just absolutely love this county. After I went to college at Dixie and then SUU, and then ran a business for 15 years, and then sold my business and went to work for Senator Mike Lee, a friend of mine who was elected in 2010, doing lands and natural resource issues. I think really what this election is about, my friends, is trust. And I'd just like to ask you that you judge me on the record that I have. Judge me on the fact that we've kept our budget balanced, we haven't raised taxes, we've been able to build important infrastructure that this county needs. This county's really at an important crossroads. And I just appreciate all of you being here.
Thank you. Okay, so with the questions, we will start with you, Troy. And this first question, the topic will be budget, and it's regarding budget transparency, which is something that is important to all of us. And it's more than just complying with the state's minimum legal posting requirements, but it's also about making sure that government spending genuinely, the spending is, the documents are generally accessible and understandable to the citizens funding it. So here, it's a 2-part question. So here's your first part of the question is, what specific steps would you take as county commissioner to ensure that the process of crafting the county's multi-million-dollar budget is fully visible to the public before it reaches a final vote? And how would you make those documents more user-friendly so that an ordinary resident can easily track exactly how their dollars are being spent? And we'll start with you, Troy.
One of the things I think St. George has done really good on their budget is, they have that budget and they have a bunch of reports and graphs that tells you what that budget means and how that budget's laid out. And I think they've done a very good job at that. A lot of the budgets don't have that. They'll just give you the line items, and government budgeting is somewhat difficult. One thing we did at Washington City in 2016 when I first got elected was public records need to be public, and so I pushed the staff to start putting everything online. And this relates to the budget because the budget is online and open, but it also relates to other government documents, right? We put every staff report, every exhibit, every resolution that goes in the legislative process along, and we didn't just do that for the city council. We did that for planning commission, land use, power board, any board and commission that the city has. And so we've tried to be very open and forthcoming with any of the public records in the city and put it out there ahead of time. And when we have, like for example, city council, the state minimum code is 24 hours noticing for a meeting. Washington City puts all our information out a week in advance, and that gives people at least a week and a weekend to be able to go through those documents and review them and digest them. Because when you put it out in a short-term advance like that, 24 hours, you just don't have enough time to be able to read it and digest it and understand it and ask the questions you need to ask.
Transparency is, sorry, just jumped the gun. Transparency is absolutely important in government, and one thing that you have to know in county government that's a little different than city government is that the budget actually belongs to the clerk auditor. So Ryan Sullivan is actually responsible for the budget, and we as county commissioners vote on it. One of the things that I did immediately when I became a county commissioner, it's one of the first items I did, is that all expenditures at the county, even though they're budgeted, if they're over $10,000, they come back onto our agenda and we vote for them so that the public can see that. We need to engage the public more. Kim Hafen previously would hold kind of open houses on the budget. We'd invite people to come in and talk about that. We've been in a transition of clerk auditors, but that is something that we can bring back and something that Ryan is looking to bring back kind of an open house. I do like to tell this story. We were having our budget hearing meeting one year, and it happens in December. We're on a calendar year. And we had a controversial issue on the agenda, and everybody was there, and they were talking about it, and then they all got up and left. And then we had a public hearing on a $200 million budget for the county, and not one citizen spoke for it. So we have to engage, but also I would invite all of you to engage with us on that budget. It is your budget.
Thank you. Okay, so going along with the budget question, our law enforcement and county staff require competitive pay to prevent high turnover, and our rural infrastructure needs immediate upgrading. We also have to maintain a strong fiscal reserve, obviously, for downturns in the economy. So when crafting the next county budget, what is your number one funding priority, and where would you cut if funding projections fall short?
Well, you hit on the number one priority. It's to bring back to the core of government. And the core responsibility of government is public safety. And we're seeing cities that are abandoning that across America. So at the core is public safety. That includes our sheriff's office and our attorney's office to administer justice. After that, we right now are taking an exercise in our county. We've always been frugal, but going through each one of our departments and really assessing processes and procedures and making sure that we're doing everything in a disciplined way. So you ask, what do we do in an emergency? Well, unfortunately, we're just probably going to have to look first at reduction in force. And that would be on kind of a department by department level, depending on the budget. But we are going through those exercises. We have gone through those exercises in the past to make sure that we're prepared to meet any crisis that's coming before us.
Thank you. Troy, same question.
Can you read it again?
Yes. When crafting the next budget, what is your number one funding priority, and where would you cut in the event that the revenues fall short of projections?
So I agree with Vic that number one is always public safety, right? If you don't have a safe community, you don't have a good community, and nobody's comfortable in that. One of the challenges we've had at the city is when I first came in 2016, the public safety portion of our budget was 60%. This year it's 88 going on 89%, and you just cannot fund a city on 11 or 12%. So we have, my staff is awesome. They've been pitching 5 nickels out of a dime for years, and for the last 3 years, we haven't hired anybody in public safety, right? So you get to a point and there's nowhere else you can cut. You have to do things and to take that into account. One of the things that we've done is we've put the fire and EMS on the budget in Washington City, and that's a tough call to do, but we put it on the ballot, and fortunately, we've coupled that with the with a 50% property tax cut in Washington City, which property taxes are the most inherent evil form of taxes because you never really own your home. But in our city, we're looking at creative ways to be able to fill our needs, to fund our budget, and also reduce the load on our residents. And I would continue to do that at the county level.
Thank you. Let's go ahead. The next question is along that same line of inflation and taxes. So all of the contracts that the county is involved with and purchases obviously are subject to inflation, and that's driven up the cost of local governance. How do you propose keeping Washington County's property taxes among the lowest in the state while absorbing those inflationary operational increases? And as county commissioner, what is your philosophy regarding taxes, and under what conditions, if any, would you vote to increase the property tax rate?
Well, first things first, on voting for increasing the tax rate, I think that's something you need to involve the voter, right? I think it's really important to involve the people and say, look, put it out there publicly and say, here's our challenges, here's where our shortfalls are, and you know, with respect to budgets, you know, it's a trade-off, right? You know, on public safety, for example, since we just talked about that, do you want a 4-minute level of response time, or do you want a 10-minute response time, right? Both come at a cost, and I think you need to review every line item and say what's the cost benefit on each of those line items. As far as inflation and inflationary increases, you know, construction and development deals with that more than probably any other field. You know, certainly during the past few years with COVID, any construction materials went absolutely out the roof. I had a project that I was doing where the lumber alone went from $1.5 million to $4.5 million in 6 months. And so you've got to be doing things, and sometimes it means you take a project and you change the time frame on it and deal with those inflationary pressures, and so that you can kind of weather, you know, maybe we take advantage now, but then we push another project off until the inflation comes back in check and the costs come back in check.
Thank you. Victor, same question. You need me to repeat it, or you?
Yeah. Well, no, I can answer it. We have to remember in government that inflation also affects all of us, all of our citizens, and we need to be careful. Taxation is a dollar out of your pocket, and so government needs to justify that. And we need to be very disciplined with those dollars, and we have consistently been that way in the county, where we consistently overestimate our expenditures and underestimate our revenues. And what that has been is year after year, we've been able to end up in the black at the end of the year. I want to say, when it comes to considering taxation, I like the way the state of Utah does it. I don't like going through it, and therefore I've never gone through it, and that is truth in taxation. But I do like the idea that if a public government is ever going to ask for a tax increase, they're going to have to have public hearings, and they're going to have conversations with you about that. I just want to point out, and I don't want to throw the school district under the bus, but I will. The school district's last tax increase was what I call a preemptive tax increase. They didn't need it, and they should have not done it. And I'm telling you, and I don't see, if you're going to raise taxes and you're an elected official, you better get ready to get in the trenches and talk to the public and let them know and have that conversation back and forth, because it really is the public's money that you're talking about.
Thank you. And so could I clarify, that was a school bus and not a St. George City Suntran bus,
No,
right?
yes.
Okay, school bus, great. Just want to make sure that's clear to everyone here. Okay, so tourism and taxes is our next topic. Our tourism economy brings in vital tax revenue that offsets property taxes for residents. But millions of visitors place strains on our local roads, search and rescue teams, and municipal emergency services. As a county commissioner, how will you strike the right balance between using funds to aggressively market Washington County as a world-class destination versus maximizing every legal dollar allowed under state law to mitigate the direct impacts of tourism on our residents?
Well, it's great that we can be in a hotel lobby in order to talk about tourism. It is true that our visitor economy has a big impact. In fact, some of you might have moved here because you first came as a tourist and visited our wonderful place. It does have a positive impact as well as a negative impact. The positive impact is the money that's spent. It helps keep your property taxes $1,500 a year lower. But I will tell you, one of the first meetings that I remember, and Sean will appreciate this, it was with Commissioner Jim Erdley and Gary Esplin. And Gary Esplin was telling Jim, You're getting all of TRT, and we're getting all of the impact. And not long after that, one of the first things I did as a county commissioner is we pulled in our mayors and we said, look, we understand that there's mitigation that needs to be, that you have an impact in your cities. Let us take some of these tourism taxes that are available and let's invest together in things like trails and pickleball courts, things that enhance the visitor's experience, but also enhance our community. I'm very proud of that we've been able to do that. And I would just continue to have that conversation. We're actually having a conversation right now as far as being able to, with EMS as well, and Sean's aware of that. The Dixie spirit is alive and well in Washington County. We need to continue to work as county and cities to solve the problems and the mitigation with tourism.
Thank you, Victor. Same question. Do you need me to repeat it?
Please.
Okay, so knowing that the millions of visitors put a strain on our local services, as a county commissioner, how would you strike the right balance between using funds to aggressively market Washington County as a world-class destination versus maximizing every legal dollar allowed under state law to mitigate the direct impacts of tourism on our residents' daily lives?
So I think at this point, we've all dealt with tourism for years and years and years. We don't have a tourism problem, we have an over-tourism problem in my book, personally. I think that, like I mentioned before, the challenge in the cities is we went from 60% of our general fund for public safety, now we're 88 going on 89, and a lot of that is the tourism that puts pressures on our public safety side of things. You know, we're dealing at the cities with the administration, the infrastructure, the public safety. Our residents are dealing with the tourists and the traffic, and yet all the tourism goes to the county, and then the county gets to decide. I think it's really important that the funds for tourism are fairly and equitably distributed, and I've said this many times because every community in the county is dealing with it, and I get it. You know, there's more dollars come from Springdale than Hilldale, right? But they're both dealing with it, and they're both dealing with the impacts of it. And we need to take that into account as we're dealing with those tourist dollars. And I think it's important that as much as possible, because it's an over-tourism problem in my book anymore, we need to look at when we spend those dollars. I want my residents to be able to see, feel, and touch every dollar that gets spent. And a lot of times you see dollars go out and they don't have access to those things that the money's been spent on.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to exert some executive privilege here because after going through these questions on the first round, the next two questions are really the same question essentially. So I'm going to ask this question regarding tourism and taxes and the directives and state law that puts constraints on how we spend those dollars. So knowing that, recognizing that we have state laws that tell us how we can spend those monies, what would you do to make changes at the state level that would allow Washington County to have more flexibility to use those funds in a way that we deem appropriate?
My question?
Your question.
Well, I think that, you know, you mentioned fire and EMS was mentioned before, right? That there is a huge impact from that, and they're starting to allow some of those dollars, but only if you're considered a resort city, right? I think every city in the county really ought to be recognized as a resort city. I know the airport's being brought up. Well, the airport, they're looking at it and say, well, they can be part of that hard, the hard infrastructure portion of the tourist taxes, but really, I think there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to use them for marketing. You know, we hung $10 million on the side of a stadium in the form of naming rights through tourism dollars. I think that there's things that you can do that's creative to make sure that that those dollars are going into things that actually have that our residents can see, feel, and touch. I had a conversation with President Smead and said, look, you know, the challenge I have with the tourist dollars that the universities received is not that the universities received them, but my residents don't have full access to, you know, the facilities that they were used to pay for. That's a tourist-only type of a thing, and I think we need to spend a lot more time and effort in being creative and how we can get those dollars in areas that our residents get to see, feel, and touch.
Thank you. Victor, same question.
Well, I appreciate the question because it alludes to the fact that under state law, there's certain regulations when it comes to TRT. And then Washington County follows those rules. Basically what happened is that hoteliers came to the state before and said, we would be willing to pay tax if you would be willing to market. And I am very proud of how Washington County does that. Washington County, we have a tab board which is made up of the taxpayers of the tourism, and we also work with the cities to meet needs and reinvest. And so the partnership that we did with the university, I think, worked out very well. I can remember when I first became a commissioner voting on, I think it was like $20,000 to go to Calgary Golf Magazine. Well, that was marketing dollars that were going to Canada. Now our marketing dollars are going to pay for a stadium and naming rights here. So we do, Sean, you know this, and a lot of you know this, is that state regulation, it follows this money. And as a county commissioner, we have consistently followed the state law, at the same time spreading the benefit of tourism. And one other cautionary tale I'd tell you is Grand County has become very anti-tourist, and I don't know if you know this, but their economy is based on tourism. So they are really struggling right now in their budgets and everything else because they decided that they were going to be anti-tourism and push out tourism.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to pivot now to the Northern Corridor. As you know, this is a multi-year saga of approvals and then lawsuits, and now we had approval and we have another lawsuit. So how would you as county commissioners navigate the legal gridlock to address the east-west traffic congestion while balancing the environmental needs to protect the desert tortoise? And how would you incorporate the Zone 6 Mose Valley proposal in that, in in whatever you would do, your efforts to get this vital corridor built? Is that me? It's your.
Well, the one thing that makes Washington County awesome is nothing's easy, right? It wasn't easy to settle, and it's not easy to build a road east and west. We've been working on this road for 30 years, and it's going to be a beautiful road, and we're going to do it respectfully to the environment when we finally get it done. And I just want to tell people I was having some conversations. One thing you have to know is that when it crosses that reserve, there's not going to be additional development. I do think we need to be sensitive to the landowners, the homeowners, the neighborhoods that are up in the Green Springs area that will be impacted by increased traffic. I will tell you, it's not a highway, it's a parkway. You know, it's very similar to Red Cliffs Parkway. We can, through landscaping and speed limits, we can hopefully mitigate, and it's my commitment to citizens in Green Springs that we'll do everything we can to mitigate the impacts of that. I do wish that Washington City would have been a little more forward thinking and talking with their developers and pulling back some of the setbacks and making sure that everybody knew that that was the Northern Corridor. But the reason the county's involved is that we do things together. So it's really helping all of our communities to cross that. And one last thing, the reason you have to do it is this isn't Kansas. Mother Nature took her time when she made Washington County, and there's not very many options for those east-west corridors, and that's why we have to do it.
Thank you. Troy,
that one
same
again.
question. Yes, so how would you navigate the legal gridlock to address the east-west traffic congestion in the county while balancing the environmental needs to protect the tortoise? And how would you incorporate the Zone 6 proposal to help mitigate the impact?
I think, quite frankly, that there's a lot of parties that have come to the table to try to get that corridor through, and I appreciate the state trust putting in, properties from Zone 6 into it. My dad, when he was a youth growing up here, they'd get a desert tortoise, drill a hole in their shell, put a ring on it, and have it as a pet in the backyard. Now we have them everywhere, right? Or they had them everywhere back then. Now they're kind of limited, but Zone 6 is a good spot for it. I appreciate the county now saying that my residents, we need to mitigate the impacts to them, because that property, or that roadway has been on the master plan in Washington City since 1996. Quite frankly, it should have been built at least by 2015 if you go back that 1996 transportation master plan. So it's a little bit overdue, and I get it's been tied up in litigation, unfortunately. I think that's going to play itself out, but And I think it's nice to see that all the different parties are coming to the table on this one at this point now to say, hey, the trade-off is valuable for us too. But it really is, it was mentioned that my residents and developers, dirty dang developers, right, built right up to that corridor. But that corridor was established, and those residents that have homes up there was because the developers went in and created an opportunity for them to have a home. I wish I could legislate honesty in the real estate department, because I don't think it was the developers, nor do I think it was the city or the county or the state or the feds. I think it was the real estate and people trying to paint a rosy picture about this road will never come. Well, I'm sorry. We've planned roads years and years and years and years in advance. You don't build them until you actually need them. So planning's been there for a long time, and it's good to see things coming together for that.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to pivot now to zoning and affordable housing. The County Commission recently approved the Planned Development Multifamily Zone Ordinance along the I-15 corridor to incentivize attainable housing and permit a variety of housing types like apartments and duplexes in that corridor. Is this the right approach to solving our housing affordability crisis, or does it risk changing the rural and suburban character of our communities? And we'll start with you, Troy.
Well, I think anytime you're talking high-density housing, you need to look at each one of those things in a bubble, right? You need to look at, in the cities, we get an application and it's an acre, 2 acres, 3 acres, 10 acres, but it's a small project. I don't think anytime you mass entitle anything, and I know applications still have to come forward, but once you grant a density entitlement, that's there. And so I think you need to look at least on high density, in a little bit of a individual setting. I think it's important too with, part of the problem with the one up I-15 corridor is that you had two mayors in that public hearing saying, hey, hold off, don't do this now. We want to weigh in on this, and the county commission went ahead and did it anyway. And then a couple weeks after that, one of the projects that was supposed to be annexed into Tokerville went back to Tokerville City and said, hey, we don't need you anymore because we can get the density we want. We're just going to go do it in the county, and then that way we don't have to pay the impact fees because the county doesn't have a capital facilities plan to be able to collect those impact fees. Well, the problem is Tokerville City is still dealing with the impacts of the tourists, or pardon me, the residences that are going to be coming, and so ultimately it came back around, and they're going to annex in. But if the county is going to get into the high density housing business, I think the county needs to stay rural. But if they're going to get in the high density housing business, they need to create the capital facilities plans. They need to create the ability to collect those impact fees, and they need to do it and be, do it in a responsible manner.
Thank you. Victor, same question.
Obviously, high density will always spark a lot of debate, and the county is the land use authority for anything that's not in the incorporated cities. And as we grow, and as we have grown, 99% of the growth is going to happen inside of city limits because you need water, sewer, and power to do that. And we do need to be careful with high density. We do want to have different varieties of housing. We do need to keep our young people here. And in the particular to the question, the reason why that overlay zone was allowed is that you do have water, sewer, it's right next to I-15, and it was actually a planned unit development. There's only townhomes and patio homes that would be allowed. It backs up to open space. And so it really is kind of a fit. I think if you look at Washington City, there's a cautionary tale there about putting too many multi-level apartment buildings close together. You start to create kind of a neighborhood that draws on law enforcement, draws on services in a way that if you spread that out, it will be better. And so I think the county is sophisticated in our community. We do work with our cities, our small cities, and we're not going to be in the high density development in very many places. There's just a few spots along I-15 where we have more of those communities.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question is regarding heritage versus sprawl. As suburban sprawl pushes further into our county's rural valleys, some say we are rapidly losing the agricultural heritage and open spaces that define Washington County. Others say we must protect the farmers' rights and ranchers' rights to capitalize on the value of their land, be able to sell it if to the highest bidder if for development if that's what they choose to do. So what specific policy mechanisms do you support to preserve our agricultural lands and prevent unchecked sprawl? And how do you strike that balance between conserving open spaces and protecting the private property rights of individuals? And we'll start with you, Victor.
You know, striking the balance is really key there. And as we've already mentioned, most of what county commissioners will deal with is our urban areas. So a couple things that we've done in New Harmony and also in Pine Valley, we put overlay zones there that allowed the citizens to interact. We also took some of the money that the state allowed us to do. When somebody rolls back Greenbelt, they're required to pay the 5 years of taxes that they would have paid if it wouldn't have been in Greenbelt. And that fund has started to grow in Washington County, and we're able to work with great nonprofits to go out and buy development rights. But we have to remember that our farmers don't usually have 401ks, and they don't have retirement plans. So a lot of times their land is their asset when they get done. And so we need to be working with them, and we have worked with them in the county as far as allowing density credits, allowing them to develop part of their land, or working with them on partial development. But this is something that we need to keep working on. I really, you know, when I look at the fields, when I look at Washington Fields, Hurricane Fields, and we see it completely growing up in just a short matter of time, it really, it hurts me a little bit, you know. But I'm somebody that lives on a hobby farm. I'm sorry for you guys that live in HOAs. I just wouldn't make a very good HOA guy. So I live on 5 acres because I need to spread out a little bit. But we need to be conscious of this.
Thank you.
Whenever I see him put time up, I think he wants me to keep going. So,
well, feel free to attempt to. And speaking of someone who would make a good HOA member, Troy, this would be the same question for you.
You knew I was already in an HOA, right?
Yes, I did.
President, by the way.
Yes, same question. What policy mechanisms would you use to preserve agricultural lands, and how would you strike a balance between conserving those open spaces versus the private property rights of the individuals?
Well, I think we as a city have already been doing that. I mean, I think I would support any property owner that has a farm that wants to put their property in a conservation easement and go through those steps and they can get monetary benefit for it if they keep it open space. You've seen it in some of the other cities as well. In the city, we've gone and tried to create or filed the legal for some meander ground along the river to keep it open. We've purchased some property from people as a city to keep that somewhat open space. We work with developers on a regular basis to say, hey, look, you know, let's create some open space and we'll give you some bonus densities in other areas. I think that's something that, especially where we're sensitive to the Washington Fields, where we've been those areas have been developing. We're also sensitive to making sure that that we create those separations within our city. So, you know, any time you can preserve open space, I think that leads to the quality of life of a community as a whole. And I think that in the county, you need to maintain that as well.
Thank you. Okay, so our next question is regarding resource extraction. To keep Washington County growing affordably, we need a local supply of aggregate materials. Yet homeowners who move to Southern Utah for its clean air and quiet neighborhoods are increasingly finding themselves downwind of heavy industrial blasting, crushing, and hauling. As a county commissioner, how will you balance the private property rights of aggregate miners and the county's economic need for construction materials against the health, safety, and welfare of the residents? And where do you draw the line on allowing heavy resource extraction near established growing communities? Troy.
Well, I think, and this has kind of come up lately on a project up in Central, right? And I thought that the property owner in that case was being fairly responsible where he says, hey, you know, I need these minerals, I need these cinders, for example, for the construction industry and roads and whatnot. And what my plan is to go ahead and mine those out and then turn it into a neighborhood or residential development. And so I think that there's ways that you can go in and say, okay, how do we leave this in a better state, even though we've gone and done and mined those resources? Because let's face it, every single construction project in the county, every road, every infrastructure project needs those materials, to be mined and then brought in and supplied to those construction projects. And so I think that there's ways to look at how do we find a happy medium with respect to the traffic of it. Those are big trucks. And so if there's things that we can do to put signals out that will let people know that a truck's coming out on the road, or that we figure out time frames for construction or traffic and whatnot, I think we need to be mindful of that of neighbors. And certainly the dust and the impacts from that manner, you got to mitigate your dust and not be blasting when you got winds that's going to carry those dusts and fines across the valley.
Thank you. Victor, same question.
There's been a national conversation about rare earths and essential material. And while it's not rare, we absolutely need these materials. We need them for our community. We need them for our sidewalks, our roads. And we can coexist. In fact, there's a couple examples. I mean, we have beautiful homes that face and look right into Fort Pierce, where there's been extraction going on for a while. You go over to Copper Rock and Hurricane. There's Hurricane Ready Mix has been there for a long time. So we do need to help kind of navigate this and make good neighbors. And we do need to worry about the safety when they're pulling out on the state roads. But we cannot keep pushing extraction of material farther and farther out of the city limits and into Nevada or whatever, because then it's just going to cost so much and it's going to take impact onto our roads. So I am pro sand and gravel. I think it's something important and critical to our community, and I do think we can find that balance.
Thank you. Okay, so let's talk about the environment. With the rapid growth comes both emissions and concerns about preserving the scenery that we all value in our county. What practical measures will you implement to ensure that growth does not irreparably degrade the environmental and visual quality of the county? Victor.
A few years ago, it's been longer, we had, what was called Vision Dixie. It really kind of set some standards on hillside ordinances and others, and I think those were appropriate. We need to balance that. At the same time, one thing that I've been doing as a county commissioner, that I've been very pro trails, taking and really building a trail system across this county. Something that allows our citizens, as we grow, to access these beautiful public lands. And we also need to take our own stewardship onto these public lands. A few years ago, we were having so much litter, and we're still struggling with litter and illegal dumping. I started a program at the county called Give Your Lands a Hand. And, I know a lot of times we complain about federal land managers, but I want you to know that I love public lands. And I think we need to take care of them. We need to be stewards over them, and we need to put points of access and recreation out onto those public lands. And I think that's kind of how we respect the environment at the same time as take care of it.
Thank you, Victor. Troy.
Read that again.
Okay, so what practical measures will you implement to ensure that growth does not irreparably degrade the environmental and visual quality of the county?
Well, I think we do that anytime a development comes through, at least in Washington City, anytime a development comes through, we look at sight lines, we look at where they're at. We've taken projects where they're on the top of a hill and we've said, hey, you can't put two-story houses up there, you got to keep them a one-story, right? I think quality of life is almost as important as the safety of a community, the safety and the infrastructure, right? Quality of life is important. Commissioner Iverson mentioned the trails. The trails is a big deal. Washington City just put a trail all the way through along the canal and connected from, basically from the north to the south. And I think it's that we need to focus on that. And when we do a development, we look at those ways of how do we create some open space in those developments? How do we flow through and create those visual corridors that allow people to experience the beauty of the community as a whole?
Great, thank you. Okay, Troy, we'll start with you on this, and this will be our last question. So that's regarding state mandates. And as you know, every year at the legislature, our local control is under attack by the legislature. So what would you do as a county commissioner to fight for our right in Washington County for local self-governance?
Boy, that's a tall order. Certainly you need to work with your local legislators. I think that, everybody that gets in government thinks, well, I got to write a new rule, and that's not, what they should be doing. I've had a lot of struggle, or our city's had a lot of struggle with the state coming down and saying, hey, we need to write a new rule for SWIP reporting. That's one that we've had real problems with. Well, it doesn't do anything to clean the water that goes in the storm system, that goes into the Virgin River, but it costs a lot of money in development and reporting for each and every home that gets built or each and every project that gets built. And all it does is create a new rule that creates a new reporting system. The law of unintended consequences reigns supreme when it comes to the state government. It reigns supreme when it comes to the federal government, reigns supreme when it comes to the county and the cities. And I think it's important to recognize that the bigger question isn't, the question of can we do this or can't we do this at any governmental level? The bigger question is, should we do this or should we not do that? And I think it's more important to look back and say, we should not be doing some of these things as far as governmental regulation. But, one of the challenges I've had with the state is they try to write a rule at the state level as a one-size-fits-all for every community, and that never works. And I think that you just need to continually push back hard and hard and hard against that overreach.
Thank you, Victor. Same question.
I think one of the important responsibilities as a county commissioner is to advocate for the county. And that's one thing that I feel that I have in a strong point. I served as the president of the Utah Association of Counties, which is our association. I've been on the Hill, I advocate. You have to understand that Washington County, we don't represent a majority of our state legislators. So working together with the state legislature, communicating with both them and the executive branch is key. But I think it's also important to stand your ground when it comes to these issues. One of the things that I'm most proud of as a county commissioner is when 2020 mandates started happening, we stood our ground, we kept Washington County open and free. 2 years ago, that was a good time, wasn't it? We all enjoyed the lockdown. And then the second time, not very long ago, we talk about TRT, they wanted to take a 2% increase in TRT to fund a baseball stadium in Salt Lake. And they tried to sneak it through at the last minute, and we went up there and we stood our ground and we pushed them back, and we had some very candid conversations. And there was some implied threats, but then everybody came back to the table, and guess what? We didn't end up with that increase. So advocacy is something that's very key as a county commissioner.
Thank you, and thank you to both of you for answering those questions. Now we have our closing statements. You each will get a minute and a half, and we'll do it again in ballot order. So Troy, that means your closing statement is first.
Thank you all for coming out. I really appreciate it. It's been a real pleasure to serve at the city for the last couple of terms. I know I thoroughly enjoy it. One of the things I really like is getting into the long-term planning, getting into the nuts and bolts of what goes into the decision-making process, talking to people and getting their input and taking that in and applying their input into the decisions we make as a city. But I'm a firm believer in the idea that even though we don't have term limits here locally, we ought to limit our terms, right? George Washington served 2 terms, and he said, my time is up. I think if it was good enough for George Washington, 2 terms at the city is good enough for me. But I'm not ready to be done with the long-term planning of the community. I think I bring something to the county level because of the experience at the city level, because we've dealt with their impacts, and so we know the shortfalls the city's having to deal with, and I can see the areas where I think the county can be a greater help to our local communities. And I think it's important that we take what we've learned and we use that and we apply those principles to the next level, but we don't let ourselves get too comfortable in any one position, because I think when you go into government initially, you think, you go in asking people, you ask the hard questions, and you're taking the input of those around you, and before long you think you know better than those that are around you, and kind of get tunnel vision. And so I think it's important to not get too comfortable at any position, but I'm excited about the challenge of working at the county position and bringing what I've learned at the city level to county governance. Thank you.
Thank you, Troy. Victor?
I also want to thank all of you for being here. I often brag about Washington County as I travel up and down the state, and I often think to myself, you know, we live in this beautiful area. There's no place like it. But the only thing that matches the beauty of Washington County is the goodness of the people. I really believe that, and I believe that it's a place that calls people here. Obviously, my family's been here for generations, but whether you are like my family and you've been here for a long time, or you just chose to come as soon as you could to Washington County, you're a pioneer and you're called here. It's been an honor to represent you. And I like I started to say, as you go into the ballot boxes, or as you not at your ballot box, or you're back home when you're filling out your ballot and getting ready to fill it in, this election is about trust. And I really think that you should judge me on the record that I have. The record of keeping taxes low, the record of paying off debt, the records of building important infrastructure that we need, like an expansion in our jail and our county building. And I feel like we're in the red zone. If I want to use a football analogy, we're in the red zone. I'm just asking for 4 more downs so that I can score another touchdown for Washington County. A touchdown when it comes to important issues like transportation, the Northern Corridor, SR9 going into Hurricane, as well as the trail system from Santa Clara to Springdale. We are really close to getting that paved trail that we've been talking about for generations done. And of course, the one issue, the elephant in the room we haven't talked about, is water development to meet our needs going forward.
Thank you to both candidates. Please give them both a round of applause. And a round of applause for Bill Hoster and Gil Almquist for also coming tonight and debating this. And thank you to you all for coming. We really appreciate that.
Thanks.
Well, I hope I did a good job of shortening those questions for you. Good job. Those questions were